which is to the people who fired you, to the people who evicted you. And those are not politicians. And I think this election is a sign that that process is alive and well. And it is certainly stoked heavily by the Tea Party folks, since they are in a white rage of hostility against the government. Some of you may remember the liberal commentators making fun last summer of the old people carrying signs, "Keep the government's hands off my Medicare." And the reporters enjoyed saying to them, the government is Medicare. It already has its hands because it's a government program. But that was a mistake. What you should have done is you should have recognized the power of the ideology in the United States, that if you like something, it's not the government, Medicare. And if you don't like something, it is the government. That equation, which is the Tea Party rides on, but certainly didn't start, runs much deeper in this country, lies behind, in my own humble opinion, the spectacle of these elections that seem so weird if you're not clued in to this ideological structure of the United States. Okay, let me turn then to the particular issue that I want to talk about a little bit, and then we'll open it up, and that is the Federal Reserve's action. So first, let me make sure you understand what it is. The Federal Reserve is the entity in our economy that plays the role of what in other countries are called central banks. So for example, if you go to France, there's the Bank of France. Or if you go to Britain, there's the Bank of England. That's the bank that is the central governmental entity controlling the monetary system. And we used to have a Bank of the United States early in our history, but there was a lot of political struggle around that, so we got rid of it. And a little bit later, about 100 years ago, early in the 20th century, we created the Federal Reserve System. It is our central bank. We just don't call it the central bank. But other than that, it exactly does what the other central banks do. One of the things a central bank does is control the money supply. Literally produces the money. And the government has an absolute monopoly in that. You're aware of that. If you make some money yourself in your basement, people will come and hurt you and make you go to jail. You cannot do it. It is a government monopoly. I just want to remind you, because we are all creatures of the ideology here in the United States, that when you hear people saying, we don't need the government on our backs, the government should get out of the economy, they don't, of course, mean that. Or if you actually encounter someone who means it, then get a straitjacket quickly, because these people need help. We always have had the government in a kind of, actually not always, but in our modern history, the government has always had a monopoly on money. And therefore the government has an enormous influence on what happens, as you can imagine, anybody would who had a monopoly on the money. So the idea that the government need not, should not, cannot, does not play a major role in our economy is a product of fantasy. It has nothing to do with the way our economy works. The government has always been a crucial factor in the American economy, and the notion that we could have a private economy in which the government does not meddle is a fantasy. If you believe that, then I will sell you a small portion of the Brooklyn Bridge as soon as this meeting is over. It's silly. So the government controls the money supply. And the government has a simple way of thinking. If the economy is in trouble, if people are unemployed, if jobs are falling away, if businesses are bankrupt, if a third of the stores on 6th Avenue remain empty for long periods of time, then how do we get the economy going again? And there are basically not that many ways of doing it. And capitalism, being a very unstable system that has had these cycles all through its history, has come to figure out that there are two broad kinds of ways to boost an economy when it is down. One of those is called fiscal policy, and I'm going to tell you about that a little bit later. And the other one is called monetary policy. And the monetary policy, making the economy work better, is the job of the central bank. Let me say that again. For a long time, the government, that's what the Federal Reserve is, has to manage the economy. Everybody who learns economics learns that. Everybody who practices economic policy in Washington knows it. However, on ceremonial occasions, you're supposed to act as though the government either doesn't do that or doesn't do it well. It's a very strange country we live in. Monetary policy, the government's supposed to manipulate the money system. One of the ways it does that, and that's what the Federal Reserve just did, is when things really looking bad, lots of people out of work, is you flood the system with money. And here the idea is not complicated. It's simple. It says, if you put a lot of money in a lot of people's pockets, they'll spend it. Economics pretends to be a very deep subject. It isn't. Like all subjects that have learned how to cope with capitalism, we in economics have done what the lawyers did. Lawyers took very simple ideas, developed a language that would make it impossible for you to understand it, wrote it up in that language, and then charged you to translate it back to the simple idea it originally was. And we do the same thing in economics. So the problem of the economy is there's not enough happening. Give people more money. And since the government has the monopoly, the government prints it. I want to make this clear to you. Okay? The Federal Reserve prints the money, literally makes the money, either by physically making a bill or just putting an entry in an account somewhere that says something has more money in its account than it did yesterday. Okay? That's what the Federal Reserve does. Is there any limit to what the Federal Reserve does? No. Is it constrained in the amount of money it produces by, say, the quantity of gold in Fort Knox? No. It's just a group of guys, and a couple of women, of course, for decoration. It is a group of guys led by Benjamin Bernanke. They have a meeting, and they decide the economy doesn't look so good. Let's produce more money and throw it in there. And they decide that, and then having decided, let's do it, then they decide how much. And it's just what they think the situation needs. They can print as much as they want. Do they need to get Congress's approval? No. Do they need to get the president's approval? No. Do they need to get the Supreme Court's approval? No. Do they need to get your approval? No. They're the authority, they do it. And they decided to pump $600 billion into the American economy starting last week. And to do it over the next few weeks. I don't know exactly how long the period is, but for a while, they don't do it all at once, they pump the money in. Okay, this is remarkable. We're now going to have a lot more money. What is the goal of this money? Well, I've already told you. It's to stimulate the economy. If there's more money around, let's say starting with banks, if they're flush with more money, they're hopefully going to be more liberal about lending it out. Yeah. That's the idea. See, they're going to come to you and say, well, we're loaded with this money. Wouldn't you like to have a loan, improve your house, buy a car, something? And they're supposed to go to businesses and say, well, there's all this money here. Here's a loan. And the Federal Reserve, which also controls not just the money supply, but also controls lots of interest rates, not all of them, but a lot of them, has also taken the step, as you know, to boost our seriously depressed economy by bringing down interest rates to record lows. Half of 1%, 1%, very low interest rates. Let's recoup that. We're trying to stimulate the economy by making borrowing cheaper than ever and flooding new money that can be lent at these cheap rates. So the whole idea is to stimulate borrowing and spending. So, what's the problem? Isn't this a good idea? Doesn't it make sense?
No, it's how we got into this.
Well, careful. Let's go step by step. It makes a certain sense. It could work. Here's how it could work. Here's the idea. If the loan is cheap to get, because the interest rate is low, and there's lots more money being produced by the monopoly government power that does it, then maybe the lending will take place. The businesses and individuals that borrow will take the money and go out and buy things. New houses, new cars, new clothes, new vacations, whatever. And as the businessmen and women who make all the things that people will buy with the new money that they've borrowed, as they see all the customers coming with the money that they've gotten from the government, they'll hire lots of people. They'll hire them to make all the extra stuff they can now sell to all the people who borrowed at the low interest all the new money from the government.